afternoon, good morning. I see that we've got people from Brazil, Far East Asia, Japan, Africa, US, and America. So I think we are almost an entire planet, probably the entire span. Canada, North America is something that might be missing. My name is Chris May as a native, and for my sins, I am still the managing director of Amazon International. As you may know already, we basically exist to build better non-profit organizations because we want to see a better world out there, and building those who improve that world seemed like a pretty good idea all those 15, 16 years ago that we started it. Amazon operates as a social enterprise, and the continuing story from since last summer is that we have picked up again training, and my great colleagues at the training team now, also based in South Africa, by the way, by pure coincidence, were unhappy with the fact that we had to exclude so many people from our in-person training. So they basically said, let's do an online training as well. Is that right, Jules? So you should be able to join us for an online training starting when? April, March? No, March not. April, May?
We are hoping to get everything on the website by the end of March and fully working hopefully by May. So fantastic. We are very excited about our new online training. We expect this to be an exciting growth part of, helping you grow your NGO. So thank you.
Great. Fantastic. So today we're not talking about that. We're talking about something more conceptual. Today is one of these webinars which is less, it's supposed to be thought-provoking. My intention today is for you to go away, and you get these word-heavy slides that you see right now, for you to use it as an inspiration point. Ask us questions after this webinar if you need to dive into it deeper, or just discuss it with your colleagues, or just dismiss it if it's not applicable either, so you at least have the comfort that this is something you've thought about at one point. We do collate these insights, and this one in particular, from our 350 or so live active NGO partners in the world. And then our mission as a social enterprise is to aggregate that knowledge, record and really analyze and really think about the experiences we're having them, and play them back to you and to ourselves, frankly, as well, so that we can all learn how to run organizations better. So, of course, this means that we have these pragmatic webinars, and we have these more thought-provoking and conceptual ones. And at the end of this webinar, I believe Jules will sort of guide you towards the other content of the more pragmatic ones. Good. Now, I'd like to start by thinking about the question whether we as non-profit organizations are struggling to adapt. And I've picked, out of the many, many challenges that we have, I've just picked three areas that may give us some pause to think. Number one is the first one here. The question is our funding that we usually put into our organization, or that we manage to attract, really suitable for systematic impact? What I'm saying here is that most of our organizations are turning away from trying to treat the symptoms of poverty, injustice, or whatever it is we are working on, and trying to address the root causes, i.e. the buzzword here is system change. The problem is that is the word system change. System change requires long-term and continuous funding at the root causes. And so that system change doesn't become a buzzword, we need to enable ourselves to work on these identified problems for a long term. I've got a specific example in a minute. Now, that is a long acknowledged goal of many INGOs, but their funding, the organization, is mostly still geared towards attracting and implementing grants, or running them as a fundraising organization, or a mixture thereof. So the problem we have is that both forms of this funding are simply too short term. A grant runs for 3, 4, 5 years. They're pretty too fixed, too rigid in the implementation, and they're not tolerant of any risk. If we really want to change the system, then we do need to accept some risk. So we need to ask ourselves some questions. This is not all of them. Some questions around, how do we actually work better with these non-grant donors, the finance, the banking world, that are investing now so much into the SDGs and into other areas of their impact and along the supply and value creation chain. How do we flex our plans when we need to? So can we turn a program that we would ordinarily fund via a grant? Can this maybe become interesting to an investor or a commercial contract service provider or a basket funding, where we have a different dynamic? So, but where we can change and match the funding towards that systematic impact that we like to see. And ultimately, that probably requires you to have more unrestricted funding. So how do we max out that that restricted income we have? How do we really allocate all the overheads to direct costs, so to preserve the unrestricted costs as a first step? And then as a second step, how do we attract a different kind of funding? Big question. I'm going to look into it in a second. The second one is sort of local-led development, local-led action. I'll summarize it here. Again, locally led development and working really with the locals who know the content best is a long discussed and mostly accepted aim of most development and aid organizations. What many though fail is that in order to enable us to really be locally led, we need to develop our organization, change our systems and processes, and in fact our structure in order to get that done. So a few examples. In a local-led development scenario, the quality of our partnerships with our implementation partners is absolutely key. Not so much the quantity, but the quality of it. Have we got the systems, the tools, the time, the staff, the communication style methods, the training, the capacity building schemes, all these things, just to mention a few, to actually improve the quality of our partnership? Are we structurally designed to just still handle projects, or are we able to empower others? Third question, can we act as a platform? Can we empower others by, for example, making our financial management platform, our project management platform, our HR platform, our project inception, our idea, our innovation teams, all these things that we work on, can we open them up to our partners? So to not just to really facilitate locally led development and to host these organizations, to mitigate their financial risk as well, which we can discuss. And can we deploy these central services in an effort to empower our partners? Now, all these things sound less exciting than the concept of local led development, but they are what makes this real. And I've seen still too many organizations where the commitment to local development as well as for system change impact is big, but the practice and the homework doesn't seem to have been done. So down here are some of the questions that you might want to think about. And then, of course, as per the title of this webinar, tech. Now, last year has been definitely, and this year has been definitely the year of AI. And AI and tech is pretty exciting. We have a specific webinar on that delivered about 2 or 3 weeks ago, so it should be on the website. Using AI for proposal writing, you might find that interesting to look up. But AI can do a lot more, and it's not just AI as well, it's a specific one as well, the Tech Revolution 3.0. It can really boost the operating capacity of an NGO beyond the usual confines of our restricted and unrestricted funding. To name just 3 or 4 examples, in a partner, the finance software is now smart enough to automatically allocate funds to implementation partners or to our partners who are supposed to lead the action, to impose fraud control, to fight corruption where it comes up, to scan messages for hints of corruption. All these things are enabling us to work through a network of partners to really deliver impact on the ground without having the massive overhead that is ordinarily required to fund with dealing with so many partners. So the scaling ability is really incredible. Chatbots, we've seen in some NGOs now directly chat with beneficiaries. They directly try to do needs assessment on a continued basis, and they elicit on a daily level about what the people we serve really need and want, and what works and what doesn't. That allows us fantastic information, but that information is useless unless we actually are able to adapt to it, which is why we're going to talk about agility in a second. Now, proposal development as well as marketing and communication benefiting massively from the tech revolution and AI, but we need to watch this space very actively. Most of us just talk about it and don't do anything about it. I think there is this famous quote that we need to bear in mind here, that we tend to overestimate the impact of any new technology in the short term. We talk about it a lot. We basically get all crazy about it, like AI. But we tend to underestimate it in the long term. I think that could be, in the case of AI, a real game changer, a real problem, if we underestimate the impact and if we fail to adapt our organizations to make use of this technology. Good. Moving on. I want to give you a bit more of a pragmatic insight. We've worked last year with an NGO, and that has an NGO and a social enterprise attached to it. And they recognized what I just said, that they had a long-term commitment to local development and system change, but their processes and systems were still built for attracting and managing grant funding. It's probably owned because of their history, and they were still set in that way. Now, having a quick look at the organization after doing initial assessment, it became clear very fast in the financial structure, in the way they communicate, as well as the organizational governance structure, that there is an unconscious incentive for boards and staff to attracting grants and completing reports. These, put bluntly, the organization has been successful in doing that for a number of decades, and its new direction, even though it's been there for years, hasn't really been reflected in its organization. So the business model and the organizational structure need to change. So this is not a small NGO, this is also an even larger social enterprise. So we're talking about hundreds of people here that are in need of a change. We didn't do this as part of a restructuring because that would be way too disruptive. Instead, we've recognized and led workshops that recognize that the business model and the organizational structure needs to change in order to attract new sources of funding that actually funds local-led development, that partners with implementation partners beyond just program management, but a real integration between the Northern organization and the Southern Global South partners, an integration of systems and platforms. So, that we don't have to email financials around, that we are planning proposals and programs together, a real integration. That required a completely new business model that attracted investors, corporate funding, keep the existing grants, but also established a brand new, and I'm pleased to say very successful, income generating arm. And marketing and communication, they needed to really boost their ability to communicate the value of what they do domestically in the global north. That was very interesting. Happy to talk about it if you want to. Happy to also talk about it off the books. We will never, we have to keep it confidential, of course, but I think that's an example of a large organization really acknowledging the fact that they're not built yet for local development and system change. Okay, moving swiftly on, we need to talk a little bit about how we change. So once we've argued the way that this is the way we need to change, this or a combination of the factors I've just mentioned or more, we have to acknowledge that many NGOs are simply not built in many ways to deliver the maximum impact in many areas. And that's understandable because there's a constant amount of disruption and change out there. And I get it. It was easier 10 years ago. And it's pretty difficult to envision a better organization in this uncertain future. The other thing is that we are sick and tired of change programs. It really shakes the organization. It causes an undue amount of anxiety in the organization. And with today's talent shortage, that is not something we really want to impose. So I would lobby for a better way to change along an agile model that takes some of the disadvantages of agile away, the short-termism, but allows us to constantly evolve, even though we may not be able to see yet to what direction we need to change. So if you haven't done already, I want to quickly, and I'm not going to read it out, I'm going to quickly introduce the concept of what really is an agile organization. And basically, it's an organization far less based on hierarchy, far more localized made, so we're getting back to that, with a shared information platform where authority is flexibly changed and enabled to quickly change course where it's possible. And that can be done in many ways. I'm happy to discuss it if you've got a question on it. We have done lots of webinars and lots of agile or part agile changes or before, but basically it's a much better way to cope with the unforeseen, with the unexpected. We can be prepared for a multitude of scenarios rather than having to change with this usual forecast mechanism. It prioritizes learning and accountability because that feedback mechanism is automatically included. And it really drives the operating model towards more impact along with the strategy. So it questions the model that is and really says, what do we need for this new strategy? So again, what I said earlier, lots of NGOs write fantastic new strategies, but then fail to, or fall short sometimes, to build the organization that is needed to deliver that strategy. I want to not stay so theoretical and give you two more examples. Another NGO we work with, or sort of a national NGO, mid-sized, has really taken the idea of learning and adaptation of its programs to learn whilst they're being implemented to heart. And they had, that required a strategy that prioritized data collection. And really, they just went into the field, they prioritized the collection of data, not indiscriminately, and of course fully compliant, but they needed to do so, and they even automized it in many ways via using some smart technologies. But then they didn't stay there. They've built in a process at the head office to build a new innovation cycle as a basis of continuous improvement, where they took that data routinely and on every 6 weeks they chose the data flexed to every 8 weeks. They have actually produced a knowledge piece from that newly collected data. And then that knowledge piece had to have 3 adaptation suggestions. So those adaptation suggestions came in every 8 weeks, initially every 6 weeks. Now, what was remarkable about it is that the adaptation changes were put to a vote amongst everyone who worked with and at the organization. And the top voted suggestion was then selected for investment to be actioned. And that way of very fast, but a very extremely digital and agile way of continuously improving, of continuously questioning the believed fixed, has really helped that organization develop some fantastic new programs over the last 2 years. And by the way, those programs were so innovative because they listened way more than their other NGOs, that they also were extremely innovative. And of course, lots of funding followed. In fact, right now, I spoke to the CEO the other day, they need to close some of their programs for new funding because they struggle to adapt, which is a nice problem to have, although it's still a problem. Another UK organization we've worked with put that agility idea towards income generation. They found, as was just said, their ground model way too restrictive. And so they have developed an internal system because they didn't quite know where to take it, where everybody could suggest an opportunity to develop a program or a product or a service to either donors, to the private sector, or to anybody else. And this resulted in a 5-fold increase in bids submitted in just 6 months. So if you increase the number of proposals and bids and concept notes and pitches you submit by 5 times in 6 months, then it won't be surprising that more funding follows. It's a bit of a number game here. So they've used that data and centrality, and they use the agile idea to focus on diversifying the funding base which again, happy to talk about it more if that sparks your interest. Okay, there are a few lessons though, which I thought I want to share with you before we open the floor up to questions. And the lessons here have been generated from our transformations, which we've handheld and we've accompanied since 2011. And they might be of interest to you too. So one of the ideas is, of course, that the major, almost naively and obvious change that we observed is that people change in the organization when the leaders do. So this agile management idea is really based on trust and obsession with the data that I just mentioned, real transparency and fast learning. And when the leaders, the executive suite, the managing directors, the CEOs, and the board internalize that, then usually partners, staff, donors, they follow. So it really starts not just at the top, but it really starts with an adaptation and a change in management style here. The other thing that I thought was interesting to observe over the last 10, 12 years is that where we've built platforms that everybody has access to, where the information was freely shared, and where teams were allowed to form rapidly around problems without management approval, that really broke the silos in the organization and reduced bureaucracy by a lot. So much so that I sometimes suspect that bureaucracy is also a symptom of just turf protection and authority being exercised only. And breaking these silos is absolutely essential if we want to deliver the impact that we do need to have. Thirdly, very simply, I really would encourage everybody to consider everything they do and see if a bot or an AI tool can do it. Check that assumption almost every 6 to 8 weeks. Booking meetings, sentiment surveys, financial dashboards, the colleague of the month vote we've had, any sort of measuring work time, filling out timesheets, identifying unreplied messages, etc. Even finding bidding opportunities can either be outsourced, be done by a bot or an AI tool. And where that can be done, I would rather invest time to hand over this process to a digital tool than continually struggle with doing it ourselves. So I would highly encourage everybody to check their work that they do and if it can't be done by technology. Last two, I think we need to acknowledge that we need to make work better for people. Most people in the sector are not massively motivated by money. So going digital, offering hybrid working time, working on their own time with their own responsibility, with less control but more accountability, is a real attraction of talent that generally makes people a little bit more responsible and invested into their work. We know we have the data, and it's been publicly researched as well, that it reduces fluctuations. I think we need to realize that these flexible work rules make better work spaces. And that is, if your organization hasn't done that yet, or if you're considering that, then that ought to be the first change that you can make, because it motivates people. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, funding really follows innovative ideas and their performance, not the other way around. We had as an example, we had a child rights supporting NGO last year, and they've really innovated and they published their performance far more. So they've innovated a lot on the programs, they've published on the performance, and look and behold, a few months even after they've started pushing out this data on a regular basis, funding partners came on board. They perceived the transparency, the honesty of the publication to be extremely valuable, and their innovation drive interesting to fund. Okay, so hopefully all of these will culminate into somewhere here that you can quickly review. I'm not going to read it out now. It's basically all the things we just talked about, these 5 pillars of thinking about going agile, including the change to the funding mix we discussed, the data, the work with people. So hopefully that is something you can quickly refer back to after this conversation. and then we are done. I'm hoping that in the last 20, 30 minutes, there's something in here that inspires you, that's something that resonates in you from our experience of working with around 300 NGOs every year. And if you want to discuss any of that privately, or just want to soundboard it out, please be in touch. Jules, how's our timekeeping today?
Yeah, you're doing a fantastic job, Chris. That was
half an hour.
Yeah.
I've got half an hour. I'm 3 minutes early. That's fantastic.
You are. But exciting news, these are training courses. The next training course we have is in London, and we have a few spaces left from the 25th to the 28th of March. It's on right winning proposals, and we would love for you to join us. So please do have a look on our website under training, and you will see our in-person courses, and join us in London. That would be fantastic. And as Chris mentioned, we are opening our online courses. We are getting prepared and ready, so we are very excited for that. And take a look at our website for the in-person courses.
Great. Shall we move over? Oh, sorry, you've got 2 announcements to make before we move over to the questions. Is that right?
Yes, it's just the 2 webinars coming up. So of course, stay in touch. Our next webinar is how to get donor mapping right. Very popular every year. So please do join us on that on the 14th of March. And then the 28th of March is our second quarterly funding briefing and donor update. These are very popular, and we had great insights in January, and we hope to share more insights at the end of March. So please do join us for that. Yeah, and now I think it's time for our questions.
Great, let's do it. I'm going to close the slides so we can focus on the questions.
Perfect. So Anton Zoe has asked 2 questions here. I'm going to just ask them both. Hi, Chris, you didn't mention blockchain in the technology section. Is there any particular reason for that?
Yeah, there is. We looked into blockchain quite a bit last year. I think there's even a podcast on the use of blockchain out there. And this is maybe my personal opinion, Anton, but it failed to convince me. The fact is, we know that blockchain is a major facilitator of financial crime. And at the moment, adding it on to your organization as a payment method may, in crypto blockchain that is, that may be reputational damaging rather than advancing. There are, of course, other uses of blockchain, file transfers, uncorruptible records, etc. We have an organization working in Syria that is using the blockchain to report incidents of war crimes, which is very interesting because they can't be falsified. So they are court just. It's an amazing technology. I'm not particularly familiar with how successful that is. I know they're preparing lots of work there, and it seems to be going well, but I haven't looked at it myself. Other than that, on the crypto side, also blockchain shine, I remain skeptical.
Great, thank you. And then Anton asked about the UK NGO example, where they increased their unrestricted funding. He didn't really understand what it was that they did. So if you could just explain.
Oh, sorry, I may have been. I should have used my additional 3 minutes to go through that. Anton, so they this is a UK organization, for example, that let me just dive into it. They found their grant-based model too restrictive, not generating enough unrestricted funding. There was always a shortage of unrestricted funding. So so they've developed a model where everyone in the organization could suggest and get seed funding for opportunities for impact that they like. So basically, we had a mid-sized number of staff who said we should do this. I found a bit here. I want to. There's a product development our partner has done, but they didn't capture this information before, and now they developed the process of doing so. That resulted in more bids being prepared, assistance being given to pitch to new donors and investors by staff, not through the usual business development procedure. And they allowed staff to submit concept notes with a minimum or zero authorization, so that they can get the authority and the bureaucracy out of the way. All these changes and some more resulted in a 5-fold increase in bids in just 6 months. Many of them were concept notes, framework contracts, and many of them actually were pitches to the private sector. And if you increase such a going out to the market by a factor of 5, it is not particularly surprising that more of pitches and more proposals are being accepted. And that's exactly what happened. So they've managed to diversify their funding base in ways that no donor mapping could have been done. And lastly, Anton, what I found amazing about this approach was, and also the willingness and the courage of management to do it, is that they've let go of the authority. They've said, the traditional way of diversifying a funding base is doing a big piece, donor mapping, a large product development, or a market map, and then setting a direction and from a consultant, and then hoping it works out. That does work at times, and it does work very often, but they've gone the other way around. They've done that, and they asked their staff to develop proposals. They've created processes to do so. They have given space for paid time, free, to develop new pitches. And that developed their program portfolio and their funding portfolio in ways that no consultant could have ever foreseen before. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea. If not, please reach out to me directly. My email address is in the slides, and then we can also just talk things through one-to-one.
Great, thanks for that, Chris. I hope that clarifies it for you, Anton. Janet has asked, please describe how they increase proposals 5-fold.
I think that's exactly that example I just submitted, that I just discussed. So again, to you, Janet, please reach out if that is not clear.
What is a digital run, please? Oh, you are typing an answer.
Oh, sorry, I clicked this wrongly. So that particular, it's interesting that questions hover around that particular organization. That particular organization realized very quickly in the matter of weeks that they couldn't do this proposal increase by simultaneous meetings. So we've created a workspace online and authority. We changed the authority approvals so that staff could run these proposals with a minimum of authorization. There was actually partially default authorization, which means you didn't even need it up to a certain amount. It would just go through, and we would just trust staff to be in line with the values of the organization. And for the vast majority, they have been. So we call that the digital run to market. As I said, that worked.
Great, thanks, Chris. Anton's asked another question. Thank you for engaging so much, Anton. We do love that. As a sector, there needs to be more unrestricted funding approaches. This is nowhere near the norm, I think it means.
Near the norm, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. What's holding the funders back from evolving? Apologies for reading that terribly.
Anton, I'm gonna disagree with you here. I don't think funders are evolving. 50% of humanitarian funding at the European Union is unrestricted. USAID has clearly acknowledged that they will unrestrict more and more funding. So have even the German donors, which are slow by any. Well, they're German. I can make jokes about them. I am German, so it's fine. So I don't think that donors are not listening to that one. I also think they are moving too slow. And if we need more unrestricted funding, then the NGO should change its funding model. The commercial contracts have increased in size way more than grants, and that is unrestricted funding. We've seen venture investments, impact investments, increase by a factor of 300-400% over the last 5 years. all of that investment is free of charge. And frankly, I still see many projects that could be investments or could be small businesses that is very locally developed, locally led by default. So I think just looking, I don't want to disagree with you there, Anton, by default here, but I think donors are moving slowly and maybe more cautiously than we would want to. But there are, for vast majority of NGOs, there is the opportunity to increase unrestricted funding if they change their funding mix. And lastly, and I've been a long-standing proponent of this one, so this won't surprise, but we've analyzed the failing NGOs over the last 20 years, and if NGOs don't change their business model, if they want to continue, taking money from the global north and implementing it in the global south, then they shouldn't be surprised that they are slowly but surely getting out of business. So I think it's down to us to innovate.
Great, thanks, Chris. Bidding costs money. Bidding. My reading today is not very good, is it? I do apologize.
Sure. Are you okay? You need new glasses there, Jules.
I think I might. Bidding costs people money and time. The company that increased bidding by 5 times, how did they prioritize what to bid on, or did they bid on everything?
Gina, that's a great question, and you've given the answer. They've bid on everything. They really took this agile methodology to heart, and they removed, for the most part, not entirely, the authorization need. And that was basically, to put it bluntly, and there's more finesse to this, but they took the bureaucracy and authority proving, they took management out of the way. And we've had program managers who worked with partner NGOs in the implementation countries for 2-3 years have had ideas. Now they could just submit this to the local embassy. They could just submit something to a business to partner up with them without fear of reprisal and with a minimum of authority that was mostly geared towards financial integrity. And again, not rocket science. If you remove barriers, people usually do the right thing.
Great, thank you. Gina has actually asked 2 more questions following on from her first question, so I'm going to run through them.
All right, Gina. Let's go.
5 times, and the 5 times increase, how much increase in funding did it translate into, was the one. And then how did they ensure that the bids are compliant with the law and internal regulations, also that the bids are financially sound and won't cause the financial loss?
Gina, on the first one, that's a very good question. Their pricing methodology had to be much simpler. Initially, the pricing was all about, we price every single project individually, and they went from this very complicated way of pricing to a standard. They took their costs, said this is what we need to earn by week, month, or quarter in order to be financially sustainable. As long as your proposed income is above that, you're fine. And you have to self-certify that it is. So you have to submit a small calculation at the back of it that was never looked at physically. It was only looked at retrospectively, and you owned and signed with your name. So it was a self-authorization thing. Yes, I know that this project, if approved as such by the donor, pays our overheads, pays our direct costs as well. And they made that calculation extremely simple and moved from a complicated pricing mechanism to the simple pricing mechanism of cost coverage. Again, happy to talk about it within the confines of confidentiality, of course. What worked for this organization may not work for another organization, so we do need to, I think we can be inspired by that change, but we shouldn't copy. I think that's very important. The increase in funding was significant. So we're talking more than 25%.
Thank you so much. Jacob has asked a question. You started by stating that for systematic impact, we need to get more than short-term funding. Reaching out to private sector for investments was one of the directions, but this is time-bound as well, right? What could you say on mobilizing resources from the context where you want to see systematic changing, local, public, civic funding, or other?
Right, Jacob. Cool question. Thank you so much for going through the troubles of typing that out. You're right. The system, to repeat, system change and addressing root causes very rarely is a 3-4 year mission. It's usually a longer term mission. And if whatever you're working on at whatever organization you're at, lends itself or commits itself to system change, then that you're likely to need longer term funding. Private sector funding is one of the ways. It can come in various ways. So if you debt finance that, then this is time bound as well, as you said. But we've done investor drives and impact investors drives where the funding horizon is 5 to 10 years, where the exit route is in 7, 8, 9 years. That of course has a repayment scheme attached to it. So we attach that, for example, with trade guarantees from the World Bank. It gets a little bit geeky here. It's a little bit. I'm a chartered accountant. I don't want to geek out here. I'd love to talk about this, but the idea to take away is that if we want to inspire system change, we probably in many areas need to get funding beyond the grants. And there are plenty of opportunities, including commercial contracts, commercial corporate partnerships, impact finance, venture investors, and also impact philanthropists, which our funding team regularly identifies. If that is something that you think, hey, let's play around with that and think about it, then please do reach out and we will.
Great, thanks, Chris. That is the last of our questions. Fiona in the chat has asked about running our right-winning proposals course in Edinburgh. So I just let her know that we are confirming those dates. It's a hot topic at the moment, Edinburgh. So we will.
In Edinburgh.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Yeah. We have fantastic friends and partners in Edinburgh. I'd love to do that. We can request it and we will absolutely do that.
Fantastic. Do we have time for one more question that got put in the chat box?
Yeah, we technically got 1 minute left. Let's see if we can make it 2, right? 3 minutes.
As it relates to agility, is there a certain specific framework that best supports NGOs or INGOs, Scrum, Kanban, SAFe? How can we get NGOs to focus on impact versus outputs and outcomes only?
Wow, Sarah, that's a fantastic question. I am not a fan of Scrum or SAFe or Kanban or in fact this template thing, because the fact is that agility is, when it comes down to, I think for me at least, this is my personal opinion, the most important element is that reduction of control and contain element. We have to realize that as NGOs who are mostly grant funded often, we are basically compliance driven. And that is not the best way to foster innovation and independent working. So whichever way of agile we use, we should try to look very hard at what do we really need to control? Where can we give people more freedom? Where can we untie them from authority? Which is usually rewarded with more motivation, but also uncertainty, as I've noticed very much in my own organization, Jules, haven't we? When we sort of said, yeah, you go ahead. That took a few weeks to instill into people's mind after the announcement. The last thing I want to say is where you want to go agile. Agile has 2 key disadvantages, and I just want to point them out. Number one is there are processes and there is work that benefits from routine and repetition and optimization. Payroll, legal advice, HR compliance, data security, budgeting. These things shouldn't be agile. If you make them agile, you're bound to mess up. So there are a lot of processes and part of the organization where agile isn't the answer. And the other part is agile is a very short-lived, fast way to try out new things. But in our world, unlike the tech world where this arises from, lessons learned sometimes only come after we have been at it for a number of years, as we get increasingly better because we live in a more complicated world than creating an app or creating a tech world. So we need to be very careful again where we go agile, because in a purest sense, agile management and agile product and program development doesn't allow us a timeline to learn from the mistakes we've made. So in particular, when you work on advocacy or anything on system change. So there we need to be a bit careful. Nonetheless, we can, there are many areas of our operations which we should absolutely make more agile.
Great, thank you so much, Chris.
Hope
Thanks
that makes
everyone for
any
joining
sense.
us today. We hope to see you in our online courses or in-person training. And yeah, good luck with all of your NGOs.
Thank you very much for hosting, Jules. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye for now.